Hi everyone, my name is Tegan and this is Westlore. Today we're going to be talking briefly about aspect ratios, and it's really a lot easier than you would think. There's only three types of aspect ratios. There's 4:3, 16:9, and 2:3:9. So in a nutshell, what do those numbers mean? Well, essentially it's just width by height, and it's a ratio because obviously you have different film strip sizes and you have different camera chip sizes as well. So it's a good way to keep track of what the box looks like with the ratio. If you take 16 and you divide it by 9, you get 185 approximately to 1. So essentially 185 is the same as 16 by 9. And so you'll hear different people using either 185, sometimes they don't say to 1, sometimes they will, or they'll say 16 by 9. 2:3:9 basically came out of anamorphic lenses, and they basically took, essentially this much and squeezed it down onto a square film strip, and then it was projected and shot back out this way. And 2:3:9 became very popular that way. Today we can still do 2:3:9 without using an anamorphic lens. We just crop the shot a little bit. Same thing with 16 by 9. Every chip size is going to be a little bit different, so you have to determine, in post, what kind of crop that you want to create your aspect ratio. So widescreen is basically more pleasing to the eye, and the reason for that is because we see this way. We see more horizontally than we do vertically. So if you look at some of the earlier film in the 30s and 40s, 50s even, you still see the 4:3 square, and it just doesn't look as good as widescreen does. So theaters, when they were trying to compete with television, tried to figure out how can we differentiate ourselves from TV, and that's another reason why they came out with a wide aspect ratio. So really, when you're looking at aspect ratios for film, there's really, again, only two. So 185 or 2:3:9. Now sometimes you'll see 2:35 or you'll see 2:40. What's the difference between that and 2:3:9? Well, essentially 2:3:9 is actually the real number, and sometimes people just seem to be rounding down or up when they talk about it, which is kind of weird. But at one point there was a 2:35, and you could create in post-production a 2:40. It just doesn't make sense. So the true number is 2:3:9, but anytime you hear someone say 2:40 or more commonly 2:35, it's actually 2:3:9. So officially there's something called DCI, and DCI is basically a set of guidelines for exporting your film, specifically for movie theaters. And what happens is DCI is a very specific set of numbers. It's very specific to lines of resolution. But the lines of resolution that they specify are still the same ratio. The different DCI packages or DCI numbers basically go from 2K to 4K. So you can choose, if you're using, for example, DaVinci Resolve, you can choose if you want 2K DCI flat, which is 185, or you can do scope, which is 2:3:9, and you can do that in 2K or 4K depending on how many lines of resolution you want. Now, for example, the DCI flat 185 ratio, the actual lines of resolution for 2K would be 1998 by 1080. So if you divide 1998 by 1080, so those lines of resolution, you still get the same ratio, 185. It's a little confusing at first, but there's really not very many options for DCI. Again, it's the agreed upon lines of resolution to export for film. So the question now becomes, what looks best? What should you do your film in? And there's really no right answer. If you look at Spielberg's films, half of the films he's done are 16:9. The other half are 2:3:9. So he sometimes chooses to go a little bit wider. I would argue that typically his more artistic films tend to be a little bit wider than some of the more commercial fare where it's a little bit higher. The height is a little bit bigger, so he's showing a little bit more on screen. Now, the nice thing about 239 is that because it's wider, it just gives you a lot more options in terms of how you can frame stuff up. And I actually kind of prefer that a little bit because it just gives me a little bit more creative looks with my films. 16:9 is still really nice, and I've certainly shot some films on 16:9 aspect ratio. But 4:3, it's like, how do you frame anything to make it look nice? I mean, you just kind of have to put something off to the side, and it just doesn't look very good. So either way, it's going to look nice. But it seems to me like a lot of films are done in 239 when they want to be a little bit more artistic. So another factor that you have to think about is what's your chip size, and what kind of lenses do you have? Do you have wide lenses? Can you capture a wide shot? That should also determine whether you want to go 16:9 or 239, because basically when you're cropping, let's say that you're using a micro 4/3 chip, you don't have that much chip to work with in the first place, so you're actually losing a lot of pixels by cutting them off, cropping them at the top and bottom. So that's kind of a problem. The other problem is if you're cropping, you're losing a lot of the stuff in the shot. If you're capturing this and then you're cropping to 239, you're losing this and this, and that's not a problem if you have a wide lens. It's not a problem if you have an anamorphic lens. It's not a problem if you have a pretty big chip in your camera and you're okay with losing that. But sometimes it doesn't make sense when you're on set to lose all of that footage. And in that case, if you wanted to capture more of, this, you might want to stick with like a 16:9 aspect ratio. One last thing, it's also very helpful to put guidelines on your screen so that you know where you're cropping. This can be as simple as something like painter's tape that you just put on your screen that helps you see exactly what you'll have in post-production. If you don't have that, it's not a big deal. It's just how it goes. One other benefit to using cropping in post is that if you didn't frame anything exactly right, you can always move it to reframe, because you have basically the top and bottom of the frame to kind of work with, which is nice. It gives you a little bit of room in post to kind of tweak your shots a little bit and maybe make them a little bit better. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something from it. If you have questions or comments, put them in the comments section below. I'd love to read what you guys think about this, and if there's anything I didn't cover, please put the comment there and I would love to answer any questions I can. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.